All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Oh, I'm so glad. I was worried during my presentation yesterday I was going to fall off the stage because I don't know if everybody notices it's blinding here and I couldn't see the edge too well. But anyway, thank you so much for being here. Just before we get started, I thought we would do some introductions of the panel. And so, Ann, would you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, what you do, and your background?
Very good. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Ann Pickren. I'm the Executive Vice President of Strategic Engagement with OnSolve. I've been in the industry for 30 plus years now. So I was counting up the number of DRJs and it was over 50. So yeah. Awesome.
Good morning. My name is Tom Crane. I work at Everbridge. I lead our best practice program. And I've been in the space not quite as long. If you count lifeguard experience, maybe. I was a lifeguard in high school. You know, I've been creeping up past 20 some years, but been in the emergency management, crisis management, business continuity world basically my entire professional career, and happy to be here with you all today.
Good morning. I'm happy to see you all again from yesterday. I'm Sean Blevins, Chief Revenue Officer and Head of North America for Perpetuity, and we are a resilience automation framework company. Thank you for your time with us, and happy to be with you guys.
Well, great. Well, thanks, everybody. And so what we thought we would do today is have a very informal discussion, but we all agreed that we were going to share not theory, but practical advice on a number of different topics as it relates to operational resilience. And so a couple of the objectives that we hope you'll take away from this is, number one, how best to assess your overall resilience capability in your organization. Talk about some practical implementation steps, depending on, everybody's in a different place organizationally, how to think about operational resilience or some related terms, of course. And then also a big part of that, and something we all feel very strongly about, is how to test and evaluate that capability so as to be able to develop some confidence. Now, before we start off the conversation, I'm going to share just a couple thoughts, just a level set for us and the audience, and then I'm going to ask the panel to react to my opening comments. And just so we're all on the same page here, when we talk a little bit about operational resilience, this is a definition that's meaningful to me. And it really all comes down to, at a strategic level, how do we continue to deliver on expectations for our customers? And it's regardless of what happens. How do we meet their expectations in a minimum capability, obviously in a bad situation? How do we prevent? How do we recover? How do we go ahead and adapt to changing circumstances? And of course, how do we learn from those, the situation that's presented itself? And when we think about that, there's so many terms out there. We're going to probably use so many of them here today. And it's a combination of what job titles might be: operational resilience, business continuity, disaster recovery, emergency management. The list goes on, but it certainly also involves business subject matter experts as well. And I think, embedded in that definition, some of the key outcomes I think that we want to talk about here is that this isn't just a reactionary effort. It's also about proactively preventing disruption. Not saying we're preventing threats from occurring, but how do we architect our organization to be able to withstand whatever's thrown at it? And can't prevent everything, though, so how do we decrease impact through a lot of good preparations that we need to take place? Also, we're not going to be perfect in our responses, and how do we get better over time? And I think if I talk to the C-suite in any organization, their number one outcome that they expect is a higher degree of confidence. And so when we talk about the value proposition as we go through all of this, it is protecting the value-creating mechanisms in the organization. It's, again, trying to minimize impact on all stakeholders to preserve our financial position, our reputation. One of the things I talked about yesterday in my presentation here in this room was it's all about being very concrete and real. How do we create context of what we do and the idea around plausible scenarios so as to build up confidence, be concrete, and also being able to go ahead and coach our organizations to build in resilience, not just bolt it on after the fact because it's so much more cost effective. So those are just some thoughts just to kind of get us started. I want to invite your comments on that. Anything I said that resonates or anything I said that you disagree with?
I would agree with all of that.
Oh,
and, I think one of the things that, I know sometimes I disagree with you, but not often, right?
Well, do it.
One of the things I think I encourage people is I see that you make better strategic decisions as a result of being focused and building a culture of resilience in the organization. Mm-hmm. So it's the concept of we've got each other's back in everything we do.
Yeah, but nothing you said was anything I can disagree with there, Brian. I think building a culture of resilience is a challenge in the workplace, but tying these initiatives to an organization's mission, what people really care about, I think is when you get more buy-in and partnership across different departments.
You bet.
So my thoughts on this, I agree. I think the key here is, and I don't get all Dr. Phil up here, right? But he says, you teach people how to treat you. So the first thing, and I've been doing this for a while too, right? So I'm an old Tom Peters fan. You guys know who Tom Peters is? He's up in his 80s now, but he wrote a series of books called Brand You. And in his case, it was about the HR department, but the resilience department is very much the same. We need to teach people how to think about resilience and the people in resilience. Are you worthy of a seat in a strategic board meeting? Are you worthy of a seat when they're thinking about directionals, when they're getting ready to build a new smart factory? Should you be there discussing resilience? Should you be there at all levels of that organization? Are you intrinsically needed as part of the strategy? And we teach people how to treat us by the way that we ask the right questions. And I always, when I'm training people, I say, you're going to be delegated to the people that you sound like. So if you sound like, and you're asking questions in this niche or that niche, they're going to put you in that niche. So it's about the strategic operational side of resilience that takes you and teaches people how to treat you and how to organize and work with you in the organization. That would be my comment to that.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So what we've done is we've prepared a couple discussion topics that I'm going to invite our three panelists that have joined me to comment on. Just by way of preparation, though, we do have two embedded polls that we're going to be asking you to participate in. So do please have your mobile devices open, the session open on your mobile device, so that we can get your input as well as we go. So the first discussion that we had is, I think, broadly builds on my opening comments. What are some of the defining characteristics of a resilient organization? And Tom, do you want to go first and offer your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think defining resilient organizations, the first thing you could say about them is they're resilient. But what does that mean, right? So they're able to they're tested and proven in their track record of managing incidents, mitigating risks to the point where they don't become crisis. So that's the kind of easy definition. But I would say, in my role, I've had the pleasure of performing assessments, resilience assessments with over 60 organizations. And the common characteristic is they always want to be better. Like organizations that are really strong and resilient and have all the capabilities and competencies, they're always trying to get better and better. And they're fast and efficient and effective, right? So if you break down the whole risk management process from managing and detecting real-time risks all the way through resolution, each step of the way, each phase, they are faster and more efficient.
Ann?
I would agree totally when you say that, Tom. And the other things that I see about characteristics when we look at companies is that they are cross-functionally aligned. They're locked in together. And Brian, when you were mentioning all the different disciplines here, I've been very pleased to see that we've had a number of people that are global security officers. And now this is bringing that physical and cybersecurity concept into what we do as well. And that's so key to build those resilient organizations. So functionally aligned and then aligned from the C-suite down. Whether you get actual day-to-day engagement with the C-suite, I think what you want is their alignment and understanding of what we're doing to make the organization resilient so that they can defend that and support you through their engagement with the board.
I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. The key is to know the language that they speak, right? So they speak top line and bottom line. So we like to, the customers we work with, the banks, the manufacturing, the airline, the governments, they like to talk in hard dollars. So what is it, if you can't quantify an event, then you can't qualify it. If you're asking me to invest strategically in resilience, I need to know what it's going to cost me for each minute, each second, each hour of downtime. And I need to know that you're able to monitor so that you can manage and actually execute and solve. So it's about taking on an accountability. So if you think about the characteristics of a resilient organization, it's not just the documentation, it's not the writing of the plans, it's not the satisfaction of compliance. It's an accountability. It's an execution level willingness to step into the gap and say, we know what this cost you, we know how long it's going to, an incident's going to cost you, and these are the areas of opportunity, because in many cases, you heard us yesterday with the airlines, it is a zero-sum game. It's someone having the same incident you have, but not responding as well. That's how you become a truly proactive part of the organization, is you can define the impact of resilience, what it means to you both if it happens to you and the opportunity if it happens to someone else. So that gets you speaking the language of the organization and moves you out of the, hey, those guys just write continuity plans for events that may not happen. So you really want to move into the actual top and bottom line impact of the business. And that gives you that seeding, not only to get the things you need to be effective, but to become a really trusted part of the organization.
No, thank you. So one of the things that I think I've picked up on a lot of the sessions I've sat in this room and in the breakout sessions is there's more and more attention being spent on resilience. I've heard that over and over again. Last week, the BCI launched its trends report on business continuity and operational resilience, and we've really stabilized on the idea that our disciplines are both strategic and operational, almost a perfect balance. But yet, again, we're also seeing that report also indicated more and more time, resources, and even financials are being spent in our world here today. And I'm curious, from a group perspective, why you all think that is. Like, what's driving that? And maybe, Ann, you want to start?
Oh, sure. Well, I sat in on Regina's session, so I'm scared enough already from all the things when she talks about, and she's spot on with that. And we see it ourselves in our business and what we do. One of the things I think we look at our data and try to make good determinations of things. And if you compared year over year, the events that we captured just around physical security, much less cyber, when you think about things that are impacting us much more frequently, a 50% increase year over year in events of critical weather, but more importantly, almost a 300% increase in transportation events that occurred. And you can think of some of the train derailments and chemical spills and things of that nature. And then an over 800% increase in infrastructure failures, be that as a result of the weather or also, malintent and attacks on the power grid and things of that nature. And when you look at those and then you think about the social unrest and the other, the health and welfare of your employees and the mental state and the stress they're under, all of those things come into play. And it's not those, and you mentioned it when you were talking yesterday about, it's not scenario-based planning, but it's dealing with the outcomes that are going to hit you and what you have to be able to do. So whether you need to plan or not specifically to the scenario, but there are going to be outcomes, and then there are going to be those dynamic risks that come behind those events that can catch you by surprise in some degree. So it's the ability to look at all that. It's so changing. It's a different world.
Absolutely. Sean?
Well, if you think about it, I think that's spot on. I think that the idea of a different world, I'm a big Avengers fan. This is one of the props from one of the movies, right? There was this thing called the blip, right? If you saw the movie, where half the population just disappeared. We didn't go through that, but we did go through a pandemic. And all of a sudden, we all said, oh my God, we all know someone who was directly affected. And we realized that pandemics aren't just things that happen in another part of the world. They happen in our neighborhood. They happen in our business. And so all of a sudden, resilience became no longer something where, I think the breakdown of the communities, the ability that we used to think we had in our government, in our neighborhoods, all these things, all of a sudden it was like, I need a plan for my family. I need a plan for my organization. I need to have people that are responsible for acting. I need to see this. I need for it to execute. I mentioned this yesterday, but in other parts of the world, in the Middle East, in India, in Europe, increasingly here in North America, they're now no longer leaving that to chance. They're coming in, they're saying, push the button, show me the audit, that you have this thing in place and it works, that you have an actual execution plan. Because we've lost a little bit of faith, you will, as a result of living through this, where we need to feel strongly that we are that we have a measure of control and that we do have a plan in our organizations to be proactive. So I think that's driving a lot of the increased attention for resilience. Before we've lived through things, and we know we're going to live through something else very, very much in our own backyard.
Yeah. Tom?
100%. I mean, increased attention to operational resilience is because of COVID, right? In every organization across the world, you now have senior executives, CEOs, everybody up the chain who are helping manage a crisis for their organization. So that persistent, consistent attention really raised the issue, got all the right people around the table working on an issue, asking questions every day. Like, I was on hundreds of COVID calls, right? And I'm sure you all were. And they were, everybody was coming together, unraveling their interdependencies. There's so many ways that organizations and different departments and services rely on each other. So bringing them all to the table really raised the importance of operational resilience. And I don't think that's going away. So that's the good outcome of COVID. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there to continue making improvements.
No, that sounds great. So this is our first poll that I'd like to go ahead and introduce to all of you because it's a precursor to our next discussion topic. So what's your number one way to identify best practices that you can apply to your organization? You're going to see a couple of different answers here, and one of them, of course, will be conferences. Don't let the fact that you're here be, influencing that, because we're not giving that information. Well, I guess DRJ will see that information, but ignore that. If it is good, if not, it's not. Anyway, take a look at that, and let's take a look and see what the what your answers are on that.
There are a lot of options on
There
that
are
one,
quite a few.
just to read through them.
But I think while you're thinking about that, and we'll eventually, there we go. So we take a look here, we got a D by far. I lost that one.
Come back.
I think that was community learning from others. I think is that what it went and it was gone. But anyway, let's just assume that was it. And what, by the way, was it?
We're getting them.
There it is.
Wait, there it is.
Oh, it's still recycling.
It is.
There we go. Still up there as community is a big one. And it looks like after that are some of the standards and a few others that are tied, and there's a lot of different inputs. But I think with that being said, when we're talking about, building a culture of resilience and building those capabilities that are out there, I am curious about, are there frameworks out there? Are there sources of best practices that our panelists recommend? And as you go through that, is it one or is it multiple things to consider here? And so, Sean, why don't you go first?
Well, that's a especially cogent question for us. The establishment of best practice right now, I mean, we come to conferences like this, and we talk about, I would say, directional conversations. And then we do our assessments. We have our engagements with the various organizations and vendors and companies. But there's really not, I worked at Microsoft, Oracle, SAP. We have these communities by industry, communities by practice, by process, and they get very detailed. And one of the things that we've been able to do, because we're a software company, is we begin to put those software practices and best practices and behaviors and all this autonomic stuff, and we begin to get a sense of, these technologies in vendor mix, these particular processes in humans taking things. So there is a learning repository that people can share in the folks that we work with. But what we found overall in the resilience space is that everybody's doing some version of Kathy from the comics, where she's going, yeah, she's like, they're all, and it's sad. Like there's almost that was terrible. But the point is that there's this need to kind of open, and it always starts with a kind of a Dear Abby moment of, well, we didn't want to tell you this, but we don't know where everything is, and we don't know where everybody can get a hold of everybody. People are hesitant to sign up with our distribution list so that they get on the hook to get to know these different things. So there's all these kind of, we'll call it personal issues that we try to take out with automation, but they're very real issues that happen across the organization, and the leveling of telling people the truth and getting to a community where people can, this is a very vibrant group of people that tell each other the truth about your organizations. It's a safe space, you would call it. But in our organizations, we're kind of expected to be the people who have the answers. So it's challenging sometimes to get the knowledge base and get the understanding. So we try to do that by bringing together, what's worked and best practices, and I'm sure the other folks will as well. But we need to find a way to do this on purpose and at scale, so that we're really sharing by industry, by process, what's really working. At SAP, they've got this down to the point where you can go out there and click and see this is order cash to management end to end. We need a same order cash to management process that says this is what the top 5 organizations in the world are doing for resilience. That would be amazing. Hopefully we get there someday.
Tom?
Events like this, obviously, listening to each other, learning from each other, it's invaluable. Personally, I'm biased. I manage a best practice program, bestinresilience.com. Check it out. That's my plug. But that's where we gather best practices from organizations that we listen to, and we understand what they're doing well, and performing studies and doing benchmark analysis. When you can prove the performance is better amongst different organizations and zero in on what they're doing and those best practices, they start as practices, they become best practices because they're performing at a high level and there's some acknowledgement there. So you really have to have that mindset of looking and listening for best practices, talking with peers of similar organizations, and being on the lookout for those best practices.
May I?
Please.
Thanks. You ask about frameworks, and there are so many, and I sit here and I think about all the different ISO standards and other standards in the industry, but regardless of what you choose, remember that it is a directional component of what you need, and none of your internal folks really want to know about a framework. They really want to know about really making us a better company and how you do that. And the results from the survey, not there anymore, but I think they're so accurate and spot on that we learn from our peers. We learn from each other so much. And unfortunately, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a minute, I think COVID has let us retract from that. Thank you for being here very much, because it's great to be able to listen and learn from your peers. But really, local communities and what you can learn from each other is the first place to go. And I think that's the one that's really lost traction much more. As I look, I've been involved in the Atlanta area and ACP for past years, and I see that attendance just dwindling away, or even establishing, getting a group of people together. I don't even care if it's face-to-face, but I would love if it would be that. And so my plea to everyone is the way we're going to be better is to talk to each other and share our failures as well as our successes. So you don't have to be proud of what you're doing. You can come in and be totally transparent. I need help, guys. What can we do and how can we learn? And I think that's something that there's a framework behind it, but if we as peers and a community of professionals, and not just the professionals here, but broadening it into, our security professionals and cyber and physical, as well as our community of first responders, and making sure that we're all talking together, we'll be better educated then to do what Sean said, which is have a C-suite type of discussion with the executives of interest.
No, I think that's great. I'm the moderator, by the way. I'm not supposed to say anything, but I'm actually going to now. You baited me. But you know what? I think that that's true. And I think that when we talk about a community of practice, sometimes we're a little bit intimidated by the fact that, hey, I'm new. Should I just be listening? I think some of the people that are the newest in this room have the best, most fresh ideas to bring to the table, whether it's through just a recent experience or bringing something in from an educational background or even just, like I said, an experience in one unique organization. And I think that when we talk about community, it oftentimes sounds great, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us to share with one another. I would love it if we had a single framework that everybody bought into that would drive interoperability across organizations, but that's silly because every organization is different, culturally, operationally, mission-wise, so on and so forth. But I also think that it's important that we do share ideas and get them from the most experienced all the way to the newest. I suspect that many of you probably thought we would immediately talk about ISO 22301 or the BCI good practice guidelines or many different things. And we can borrow from all of that. I think the key is it's not a pick one, it's an and it's an and plus practical experiences. And one of the things that I've always thought by the way, I've been involved in ISO standards work since 2010, and I did a lot of leadership on that. It only goes so far. I'll be the first to tell you that. And I think that was actually one of the reasons I wrote the book that I did back in 19, is because what it doesn't talk about is engagement and really getting into the root cause of poor performance. And so I think it's an and, not an or, but it does start with everybody sharing, from the new person to the most experienced. So thank you.
I'd like to key on that, and that is, and this is, that's such a great point, right? Because you create, we are able to push a button, get ISO-based reports that are audit ready, but who cares? It's about who cares. And that who cares framework, the messaging that says, okay, I've got to go have a conversation with the CFO. How do I make him care about what we're doing? I don't think that's something that's going, we talk about organizations being different. We should be able in this room to craft 4 or 5 key ideas or themes that say, if you're talking to this role, you need to explain to them what you're doing and why it matters. When this event happens, here are the actions we're going to be able to take across the organization. And again, here's the financial impact, and here's how we quantify it and qualify it. And then here's another role. Maybe that role is in operations or that role is in HR. Why should they care about resilience? And so we help you. We need to build a framework for you to communicate the value of what you're doing across the organization. I think that's one of the missing things that would marry very well. Then you can hand them an ISO as evidence of what you do, right? But the evidence of what's in it for me and why should I care and how does this impact our top and bottom line of the organization, that's a framework that we owe. I think that we could all community-wise build together and say, I had this conversation, and I had this conversation down in the shop floor, and those people didn't even know we existed, and now they rely on us as they go about their plans. They loop us in to say, how does this impact overall resilience? That's something I think that's missing, is to become intrinsic and to give you the messaging and the words to say to do that. So that's something that all of our companies can come together, and we can all come together and maybe focus on as we go forward and come out of this pandemic and begin to reunify. The other thing I would say real quick is, as I look across this room and I look across organizations, we're aging, We need to bring in young people. We need to get them fired up. They're very dynamic. They'll go through the organizations and set fires. I think it's very important that we think about that and do that on purpose, because resilience for the next generation and handing off and making sure that the organizations and see that we have succession and that there's a plan here for getting even more resilient, even more strong. And these people, it's not just the guy that's going to retire in 5 years and he's the only guy that knows where things are and how things work. But we have a family that's growing. So hiring young, dynamic people and getting them to engage in resilience, I think, is incredibly important. And then training them with the right messaging is very important.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So we promised more of really something that was concrete and actionable, and I think this next question aligns to that. I'm going to ask Tom to start first, but when we talk about getting started on this journey, or maybe picking up on where, at a certain level of maturity or capability, what are some of those steps an organization should consider to either boost energy, build culture, build capability? So, Tom, any thoughts on that?
First step to becoming a resilient organization, I think, is just know where you are today. Take stock, take inventory of your tools, your processes, your capabilities, and run scenarios and see how you will handle incidents. Look at the last after action report. Just know thyself, right? First step is know thyself before you can take the next step forward, which is continuing to build your capabilities and become more competent by exercising those capabilities, testing and validating those through real life or exercise situations.
Yeah.
Great way to start, and I would call it that gap assessment. Where are we? But to do that, I think a lot of times I see organizations that we strive to be what we would call operationally resilient and making progress, but we still operate in silos, right? So there's a bit of conversation, but not a lot. And to be resilient, it's not only security, both cyber and physical, and also business continuity and IT disaster recovery, but it's your financial team helping you. A totally resilient organization requires a lot of cross-functional groups. And I really think one of the steps is broaden your awareness across those groups. Make sure that maybe you can begin to get that community internally in the company itself. Maybe some of your companies are small enough that's easy to do. But to bring together and start talking about recent events that other people have had happen, headlines that you talked about, and start saying, how would we have responded? And would we have been able to communicate and coordinate as well? What I've seen happen is we talk a good story, and then when something happens, everybody goes off marching on their own functional area, and they forget to come back to that center group of collaboration to make sure that we're linked in what we're doing. That's going to be the key to making that great step into being resilient. You won't be able to do that by yourself without having all those individual functional groups together, and I think that's a very key thing.
Yeah. Sean?
Well, this is one of my favorite questions, because when we run into these situations with mindset and culture, I don't think this will come as a surprise to everybody in the room, but the application owners and the compliance owners and the CDMDB owners and the Fusion owners and the you name it. Everybody is all copacetic, and we're all in love, and we're all wearing our hippie gear until something goes down, right? And then this happens, right? Mm-hmm. You didn't update this. Well, that wasn't where you said it was. That's my department. That's not my job. I didn't update that. So how do you prevent that? How do you preempt that? And I think the answer is you empower people to iterate. You iterate together. Most of the organizations that we run into, they do drills, but those drills happen far fewer times than they need to. And they're usually constrained by technology, and I can't get the right people in the right order to do the right thing at the right time. But I'd like to do a drill every week if I could. I'd like to hit that big red button and prove this story. I'd like to get people out of the equation. So we find that automation makes a big difference, but the iteration and the trust is built because that person's not going to throw you under the bus. That person is there for you. They've got your back. And also sometimes it's like, oh, well, thank God there's my stop doing list. I don't have to do these things because, in our case, we've got things to take over. But overall, you've got to find trust in the organization. And the trust comes from executing together. It's like we can talk all day long until we get on the field and play ball. But when the game's on and when the simulation's happening, the drilling's happening, if you can't monitor, you can't manage. You have to be able to drill and iterate. And that's how you build trust. So the culture comes from getting on the field, getting dirty, and then you realize, oh, I really do need that person. I really do need this team. We are intrinsic to each other's success. But taking on an accountability for success culture and bringing that up to the C-suite, letting them see that you have, again, identified yourself as being accountable, and then running through those iterations and doing those drills really make a cement and a bond between people and a culture. That's how you get to resilience, in my opinion.
Yeah, just to react to a couple of the things you've all said, I think number one, I don't know if all of you feel the same way, but coming out of the pandemic, where we used to ask for and we used to beg for time for that annual exercise, now I've had countless experiences with the C-suite saying, we're not doing this frequently enough. Let's do it over and over again. You talked about updating those plans. Let's move that energy into just getting together so we can build trust amongst the team. Tom, you mentioned know thyself. I could not agree more. And I actually owe an article to Bob and company. I think it's due in a week and a half. And it was a study that I did. I just did a really informal poll on LinkedIn. And I asked people for their comments and their opinions on what's more important, plans or building I called it a digital model of the organization, which is code for know yourself, something that you could actually farm. So if something bad happened and I said, I lost X, what are the downstream implications? That gives you that flexibility based on knowing yourself to react and conceptualize based on teams that trust one another. And I think that's so huge. And I'm not trying to disparage standards that emphasize plans and I'm not saying BIAs are important or not, but I don't care how you figure it out. Know yourself, understand the context by which you operate. I think those are huge. So let's do another poll. And this poll is pretty simple. And we got you far less options to answer. Is your C-suite buying into or prioritizing operational resilience? And again, you're going to see a couple different answers. Yes, bought in and engaged. Partially. Situationally. No, not prioritized at all. So if you could give us that, your inputs on that would be great. And we'll see how all that's kind of starting to come in.
You're looking that way.
I know, I got two different versions. So we're seeing number one right now is partially. Number two, yes, bought in. 3, situationally. Not at all, and thanks for the honesty there. And sometimes I think we have to look at this, and we've talked about a couple of those techniques. I certainly shared one yesterday about grabbing the headlines and taking advantage of that, and I think we've also shared a few others here as well. But maybe we can talk a little bit about that here in our next discussion topic. And Sean, I'll ask you to start, but sometimes I think this is about the message that we deliver and how we communicate it. And if you had to deliver that 30-second elevator pitch to get people excited about resilience or kickstart or reinvigorate that, what does that look like to you?
Well, I think 30 seconds with the CEOs and CFOs I've talked to is about 20 seconds too long. Right? You got 8 seconds, and if you don't say something good, then you're done. If you've got something really compelling, you'll get another 8 seconds, right? But they want to know what's in it for them. WIFM, that's the radio station everybody listens to. What's in it for me? I have to go in front of the shareholders. I have an earnings call. I need to know what is the strategic relevance of this to my, I have 2 screens in front of me if I'm a C-suite person. The first screen is 3 years from now. The next screen is my earnings for the next 3 months. If you can't put it in one of those 2 contexts and you can't teach me, you have to teach me the actual words that I need to say that says, I had a conversation with our resilience team. They said we need to think about these things because these things matter. We'll never get to smart factory unless we can do resilience automation. Unless we have the ability to begin to get to some of the AI capabilities we talked about. You have to train them to think about how, frankly, they cannot meet their goals without resilience. They can't get where they need to. The promises that they have made to their shareholders cannot be realized without an ironclad, bulletproof resilience capability. And when you say that to them, you are signing yourself up for that. So that means you're out of the basement. You are literally now one of their strategic team members because you have said, I'm not below the line. I don't just want to do my job and go home at 5 o'clock. I want to make a strategic contribution to the future of this business. So yes, you are signing up for accountability. You're signing up for execution. You're signing up for, avoiding the newspaper ad or the newspaper story that says you're down and here's the rip to the brand and your stock market dropped. You're signing up to be accountable to that executive. So you need to be able to quantify those results. If something happens, it costs you this much money. This is the hit. Here's the story we showed yesterday with Toyota and the airlines and Square and those things. It really is going to happen to you, Mr. CEO. It's going to happen. It's not an if, it's a when. It's also, the good news is it's also going to happen to the people you're competing with. The question is, do you have the ability to walk into your board, to walk into your shareholders, to walk in your next earning call and say, we have a plan, a proven execution plan that we can drill through, that we have high confidence in, is a strategic growth advantage to us that protects our share price and protects this. So if I had 30 seconds, I would say, we can protect your share price. Let me show you how we have built a plan here to ensure that we will continue growth without interruption. And you'll have the ears of the CEO. And once you have his ears, then you can say, here's how we do this, here's how we iterate through this, here's an actual idea that quantifies saving you $100 million here from this event. Every minute cost you this. Here's the actual quantified. They deal in numbers, they deal in dollars. So sign yourself up for that. Come out of that idea that, it's a operational framework. It's not just an operational framework, it's a business framework, it's a revenue framework. You are protecting the organization at the core. And I hate to say this, they will sense the passion that you have there if you have that passion. So you need to put that passion and step out and sign up to help that person, that C-suite member, that CEO, that CFO, meet their goals. That's what I would say.
Ann?
Could you say that in 30 seconds? No.
I'm long.
It was good.
I'm sorry.
30 seconds is tough. I think it would go something like this. I'd just say thank you, Mark, for the investment that you've given us to date. And with the request for the additional dollars, our intent is to make you a more effective and strategically placed organization to make better decisions and know that we will have better outcomes for any type of rising and increasing risk that we're seeing in the industry today. And was that 30 seconds?
It was about 22.
Yeah, you're right. But I think it's right. It just netted out exactly what you said, which is I'm always going to start with a thank you for what you've given me now, but I need more. And it does have to align with what they're going to do to protect their job to the board's responsibilities, and the stakeholders or shareholders of the company. Not to mention the improvements to the employees and your customers and your services. But it's all seeking, and some of the right words are, efficient, better outcomes for the kinds of risk that might hit us, and looking for becoming a strategic partner in thinking and making decisions like where we build new locations and where we're consolidating and taking out locations. So wait, that's strategically not a great decision. But all those things can be summarized, and then you get that chance to talk a little bit further.
Yeah. Tom?
This is a fun exercise. I hope you're thinking, how you would react to this question if you were on the elevator with your CEO. A lot of people answered the poll and said the CEO is situationally interested or engaged. So I would try to leverage a situation that would appeal to the CEO. The situation could be their latest priority as a company, whatever the big thing is, a new product release or what have you. Or it could be the last, Sharknado event or hurricane or something in the news. And if you could say, hey, did you know, we're not ready for this. Or I'm not sure if we're ready for this. We need to, we probably need to boost our capabilities. Something that piques the CEO's interest, right? Because 30 seconds, I don't know if you're going to sell them on an idea, but if you could plant the seed, get them thinking about it, and a couple weeks later, maybe you'll see something trickle down, and all of a sudden, you're doing a crisis management tabletop exercise with the CEO. Who knows?
Yeah, all you want is the invitation to, get with my administrative assistant, set up the meeting. Right? That's all you want there.
Yeah. And I think what I'm about to say is a fact. This is not open for debate. I think if you were to ask 100 CEOs, 100 of them will say the exact same thing. I make an investment if it earns me money, saves me expenses, or manages risk. And if that 30-second pitch has to address hopefully at least 2 of them. And once you get through that, and by the way, you can tell them all you want that they should be investing or doing more, but until they come back and tell you that you got to find a way to get them to, basically rally their leadership teams around this. One of the things that I've found is if you master the 30 seconds and get them and tie it to them, especially if it relates to confidence around making money, spending money, or risk, that if you get them in the room, ask them 4 questions. And by the way, when I say this, them, I'm talking the leadership team, and get them to talk to one another. Why should we invest in resilience? What should we protect? How much do we need? And who should be involved in our organization? And if you can get them talking to one another and get on the same page with those 4 questions, I think that's where the magic happens. I call that the frame meeting. It takes about 60 minutes, but you got to get through the first 30 seconds to be able to get them to invest in the next 60 minutes. And I think that's why this question's so important.
I think the breakthrough for us is that those meetings happen, but they tend to be ethereal. And the closer you can get it to every minute, every hour, every 10 minutes of downtime, how long until Newsweek writes the article, right? How much time do I have until I take a hit in my stock price? That makes it extremely tactical. And so the closer you can get to evidence and say it's $10 million a minute, we're doing a deal with a large agency, and it's literally a federal agency. It's literally hundreds of millions of dollars when these things aren't available. And the impact is immense if it's a bank and the ATMs aren't available. So putting it in quantified dollars, numbers, and cents is how you can engender that conversation. If you have enough evidence to show from the people, process, and technology, you can roll that all up into a nice, provable, then you can just hand it to them, and then that will engender them to go, oh my God, this is a priority.
I would add one thing. The only thing I would probably disagree with is get them to say that to each other. Enable the situation where you're not the one delivering that news, because they're immediately going to put up that barrier and say, oh sure, but that's situation. But if you get a CFO saying that the CEO and the COO then goes over and disagrees, get that conversation going and let them buy in themselves.
That's right.
And just facilitate that and let the magic happen.
You may only get half of what you asked for, but it could be twice of what you need.
Twice as valuable.
That's
You
right.
bet.
That's
You
right.
bet. So let's talk about one more concrete element here, and I'm going to invite Ann to talk about this first, because this is something that's super important, and it's a constant struggle. Yes, people want more exercising and testing involved to build confidence, but how do you do it? What's generating the most value and the most interest? What do you think?
Wow.
You got 11 minutes and 31 seconds.
I'll be done by then. When I think about testing resilience, I think the thing we do is we fall short. We make it too easy. We don't want to fail, right? Mm-hmm. And you said it. I picked up a lot from you yesterday, so I learned something. No, but you want the good things and the bad things, and you really want your test to be challenging. You don't want it to be surface level. And I know a lot of times when I've seen people working through various, if you're really going to test operational resilience as a whole, I'm gathering you're going to do it through some type of walkthrough, right? You're not just going to say, let's see if we can shut the business down today, right? And respond to it. So those simulations or exercises that you're doing, those workshops, I'd stay away clearly from what is the scenario that happened, right? Let's think about what is the outcome we're presented with. But leverage what you've seen in the news, what you're watching. If that had happened to us, what would we do? It would, with the same outcome presented, whatever it was, how would we respond? And I go back and think years back in my career, before I was in this line of business, but was actually running an IT management for a manufacturing company. One of our data centers had a train rail that ran right behind the building, right? Whoever thought? It was built there, nice brand new building in an old textile town, wonderful data center. And after I left, there was a derailment as a result of an error in the switch, and it derailed the train, and it had chemicals, and unfortunately there was loss of life. Totally ruined the data center, and there was no plan as how to escape, leave, or whatever, you know. How would you ever think about those? So what you really have to do is get out of the scenario, but think more appropriately about the risk that you have, and align then to what could be an outcome that we have to address. And obviously cross-functional is very key.
Yeah. Sean?
Me? Well, this is passionate for me. This is just where the rubber meets the road. There's such complexity in these organizations. I'm talking, you know, dozens of thousands of people, thousands of locations, thousands of servers, hundreds of applications. The truth is, when you think about testing operational resilience, human beings, you know, if I was to ask you to name your top 50 IP addresses for your top 50 applications, nobody's going to do that. That's not what we do. That's not how we collect and think as a people. So if you can't monitor and then you can't manage. And you have to be able to do that in real time. So you have to admit you know, if it comes to testing, you know, no one expected the derailment. No one could think about that. But in the same way, all those incidences where there's man-made failure, it's a technical glitch. The guy was doing an upgrade at United, and all of a sudden the planes are down. Nobody can fly anywhere. You know, Southwest, they're putting their pilots in attendance together, and all of a sudden nobody can put that package together for the airplane, so the airplanes are down. That wasn't a terrorist attack. That wasn't ransomware. It was just ignorance, fat-fingering by one person, and the whole thing's down. So when you go to test operational resilience, the first thing you got to do is have real-time vitals that come through your whole organization and say, I'm testing and looking at everything as it occurs. And we believe that AI is the way to do that you need to have automation that's giving you that heartbeat and letting you see that. Because if you can't monitor, then you can't manage. So then when you go to test it, when you go to drill it, it's not a exercise. And the truth is that some of the banks and the folks we work with, they have to deselect applications out. You know, we don't have enough people, or we don't have enough scope, or things aren't where they're supposed to be. So we just, in order to do the drill, we just deselected those 30 applications. So testing operational resilience means you've got to have the investment there of, in my mind, and I'm very passionate about this, that we can't ask people to do things that people don't have the capacity to do. So let's decide what the people is, the process, and the technology, and let's let them each have their, let's invest in all three of those equally. I think in some cases, we put a lot of demands on the technology side, and we haven't done anything other than say, okay, Bob, if this goes down, you need to do this. Well, Bob has a day job, right? Bob isn't doing that stuff. So we handle the process, and we handle the people side and the communications, but when things really go south, there's not the technology that can, where the machines can provide and do what they do best. So I'm very passionate about that.
Great. Tom?
So first thing that comes to mind when I think how to test operational resilience is drills and exercises, right? But I think the reality is real world situations are the best tests. You couldn't imagine some of the scenarios. You couldn't design an exercise with all the things that happened in real life, so many past incidents. And so really taking the time to review past incidents, get a proper debrief, hot wash together, after action report, and go forward and make improvements. But in addition to that, drills and exercises are so important, not surprisingly. I hosted the Best in Resilience tabletop exercise with many of you yesterday, and I think exercises are excellent. In fact, I think an exercise plan, multi-year exercise plan, where you're hosting exercises, facilitating exercises at all levels, from the kind of corporate, enterprise level, crisis management team type of level, all the way down to site level and regional and markets and so on. There should be multiple exercises per year and increasing in complexity so that you're building your capabilities over time in a way that maybe it starts easy, but over time, as you're conducting more drills and exercises, you're always improving, and it's not all just the same types of drills and exercises. You need to also do failover, take things offline, and so there's when I think of a training and exercise plan or a drill and exercise plan, I think of multiple components, and it can't just be like, oh yeah, we host one tabletop exercise a year, so we're doing our job. I think it has to be more than that.
The number one, just building on that, the number one question I get is, there's an expectation I should be doing end-to-end testing. I can't do it all at the same time. And I don't think that's the expectation, and we shouldn't assume that is the case, but being able to test all elements of an end-to-end process or an end-to-end service delivery capability is essential. And as we do it, one of the key roles that I think is very practical for us is every time someone says they rely upon someone else, let's make sure we test that capability of that handoff, that interaction, because I think that's where the danger happens to be.
It is.
So, all right. Well, I think we got about almost 4 minutes left, and we're got a couple of questions that have come in. And what I'll do is I'll read them, and we'll see who wants to take it. Automating is expected in a software environment. How do you automate life and safety, infrastructure assessments, et cetera?
Any best practices? Gosh, that one's tough.
How do we answer that one? I mean, that's a difficult situation.
Yeah, the thing about the software environment, it is technology, right? And you can leverage technology in automating and restoring and recovering those environments as much as possible. I think the main thing that you can do around assessments for life safety or infrastructure is I'm not sure you can actually automate it, but you could leverage technology to build those metrics and keep them historically for you, and everybody would use their own set of tools. I'm just thinking of a business intelligence tool of some sort that lets you track and monitor, but automate, I'm a little uncomfortable with automating.
I think use your 3 words, know thyself. That's where the software element comes in, but it might be short of automation.
I think what the questioner is getting at too, though, is how do you do it faster or more streamlined? And I think infrastructure assessments, right? If there's a major outage, power or internet or utility provider, if you are a business and you want to quickly assess the impact to your organization, being able to do that assessment, get real-time results back so you can quickly identify, kind of a scene size up, get initial situational awareness of what's happening across your organization. So that could be automated. I have some thoughts on that, but with a minute left, I think we'll...
My only thought to here is that you need to be able to execute, right? So you have to get out of the ether and actually iterate. You have to execute these things. It's not just about automation, it's about proving the automation. So if you're a BCP professional, you've got to be able to take that people, process, and technology and prove this by iterating through. So you need to get into the actual execution, the drill, and get some results. And the faster you can iterate through that, the more confidence you have, the more you'll be able to audit. You'll be able to see areas where you can remove human and replace with, these are things where you can just stop doing. So, but you won't know that till you get into the execution and the testing.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned AI before, and I mentioned kind of a digital model of the organization. If you can pair those two together, and by this way, this is a hint as to what I'm working on right now, is if you can answer two questions: where are we vulnerable to X, and where do we lack a capability to respond or recover? If you can use AI to answer those two questions, that's a form of automation. It may not fully address everything, but it gives you something to work on, and it gives you that awareness. Real quick, 30 seconds. Is it a good idea to engage executives in exercises? Sean, yes or no?
It's funny. I would say yes and no. I have a real life story of a CFO at a large bank calling into the middle of a one of these group growth conference bridges and saying, "Where the hell are we? I don't know why I'm not informed on these things. All I know is that you folks are doing this massive drill all weekend long, and I have no idea if it's being successful or what the gates are, or are we red, yellow, green?" So proactive communication of what you're doing and why is very important. At the same time, you need to manage that communication in a way that gives it to them, again, in a form that they understand and can consume.
I think if you're asking them to participate in a response effort, the answer is yes. If you're
Yes.
not,
Right.
no.